Good evening from Central Pennsylvania, and welcome to another Provident webinar. I'm your host, Ed Mann, Director of Training and Education for Provident. Tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing Jeff Pauley, Fire Group Manager for Pacific Pointe Consulting. Jeff and I contacted one another while participating in a conference call related to firefighter occupational cancer. That led to a podcast that aired on March the 1st. I quickly learned that Jeff is very passionate about the subject, and I will have him explain why he is so passionate about occupational safety and health, especially those people who work the scene after the fire's been extinguished. I'll have Jeff introduce himself after I review our Provident introductory slides. So this is our Provident webinar series, a little bit about Provident for those of you who've never joined us before. Provident started in 1902 as an independent insurance company in the Pittsburgh area. In 1928, they began serving volunteer fire departments with accident and health policies. The owner of the company in 1928 realized that there were volunteer firefighters in the Pittsburgh area who would get hurt doing stuff for the fire department and couldn't work, and they had no way to make up their lost wages, and that's where it all got started. Today, we provide insurance for volunteer combination of career firefighters, emergency medical responders with a multitude of programs. Recently, we started offering an accident and health policy for law enforcement, and we also do some special risk programs. We're celebrating our 7th year as being the top insurance employer as rated by the Insurance Business America magazine. Some of the programs that we offer are accident and health insurance, as I mentioned earlier. And by the way, I want to mention this since we're talking about occupational cancer. Our accident and health policy in some states, not all states, now has a optional cancer rider on the policy where you can get anywhere from $2,500 to $100,000 in coverage, depending on what you want. So I can't tell you about every state that it's offered in right now. If you have an accident and health policy with us, you can ask us after the webinar by email to check to see if your state has it, or ask your insurance agent or broker whether or not we have it. We also have a 24-hour accidental death and dismemberment policy that provides insurance coverage to individuals while they're on duty and off duty. We have a group term life policy, a critical illness policy that covers cancers, heart attacks, strokes, and renal failure, and our Fire Plus property and casualty program. If you're a property and casualty client, you have access to our Fire Plus Academy, which is through Fire Rescue One vis-a-vis Lexipol, with over 800 online courses. All of the full-length EMS courses are approved by CAPC for continuing education. On May the 27th, I'll be doing a webinar with Will Anderson from Ohio on fire chief burnout, the causes, consequences, and potential cures. So keep your eyes open for it. And tonight, as I said, Jeff Pauley's with us tonight, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And okay, Jeff, if you want to introduce yourself, I'm going to turn my camera off as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to thank you for having me. This is just a wonderful opportunity to help get this important message out. Just a very little bit of information about me. I spent 23 years as a police officer in Maryland. Retired from that, did some other stuff. I've been a volunteer firefighter off and on for many, many years. In August of 2010, I was living in Bedford County, Virginia, south central near Lynchburg, between Lynchburg and Richmond, Virginia. And steamy August morning after sitting on the tailboard after a structure fire, and the county fire chief came up to me and says, "Hey, what are you doing next month?" I'm like, "I don't know what's up." So, long story short, I went to Virginia's 4-week fire investigator school and became a fire investigator there. Spent 8 years working there. Moved down to North Carolina 4 years on doing private investigations till my knees gave out, and am now doing consulting work around fire service health and safety. In a moment, I will explain to you my why for doing this. And we tried to, there we go. Okay, so the fire's out. We're talking about post-fire scenes. What the heck's the issue? Well, we're going to spend about an hour or so, maybe a little more, answering the question, what is the issue? And by the time we're done, you will all certainly understand uh, what the issues are from a health and safety standpoint regarding the post-fire environment. We're scratching the surface. We're going to cover a lot of material tonight. And there will be a question and answer session, if you will, at the end. So if you have questions or comments, or get them in to either the Q&A or the chat, and we'll get to those at the end of things. So here's my challenge. Health hazards can exist at pretty much any post-fire scene. The problem is they can't be seen. Your body, the human body, just cannot detect them in most instances once the fire is out. So the challenge, the goal is to keep yourself protected in what could be a very mellow, non-hazardous looking scene for something that may or may not happen well down the road. We'll see how easy it is to get to that point. And then we're going to talk about some safety issues too. So who are we talking about here? Well, certainly talking to you if you go to post-fire scenes. But I'm also talking about anyone that you send to work at a post-fire scene. So who is that? Insurance adjusters, engineers, investigators from other agencies. If you're a fire investigator on the fire side, you may have law enforcement people there who don't understand what's going on. Remediation workers, boy, there's a group. I don't know if anybody here attending tonight is associated with remediation work, but there is a population of people who really do not understand the health hazards. And there are others, right? If you're on the public side, this could include CSI personnel, law enforcement officers, medical examiner, coroner's office, funeral home staff. How many of you have had a fatal fire and the funeral home folks show up? What are they wearing? They're wearing a coat and tie in many instances and street shoes, and want to come traipsing into your fire scene to recover a body. First of all, no. But second of all, they don't understand the hazards. Uh, and most of these folks have little to no training around the subject that we're talking about tonight. So there's a lot of work for all. So I certainly challenge all of you to, after tonight, to take the opportunity to share some of this information with these other folks who may be showing up at your scenes uh, and not aware of what's going on. So what is my why? Well, here it is. And it comes in two parts. Uh, when I started in Bedford County, this gentleman, John Jennings, was the fire marshal. He had retired from the fire department in Lynchburg, Virginia, or neighboring city, and he'd been a fire investigator there for many years. Um, John never wore a respirator. Uh, that set of blue covers got washed every once in a while. When I showed up at my first scene after getting out of the Fire Marshal Academy, I showed up wearing uh, a lot of PPE, and his comment to me was, "What the heck are you doing wearing all of that stuff?" So we started working together in 2010. In September of 2014, we were at a meeting to discuss an upcoming training class, and John had lost his voice. Wasn't sure why, wasn't sure what was going to happen. Um, by February of 15, so 5 months later, John was dead from occupational cancer. And that helped me down the path of what I'm doing today. The other person that had a serious effect on what I'm doing is this gentleman here, David Creasy. As you can see, he was the fire marshal in Richmond, Virginia. This quote that is on this slide is from about a 12-minute video that he recorded for me when I was the chairman of the IAAI's Health and Safety Committee that we used at training all around the country. So he was convinced that dermal absorption was an issue. He spent 23 of his 50 years conducting fire investigations or managing fire investigation scenes. In June of 2014, he went into the hospital for what was believed to be pneumonia and got his cancer diagnosis. And the good news is he was around for a little over 4 years, but very, very tragic loss. He spent in those 4 years a lot of time going out and talking to people about his journey, and that's how I met him. So that's just two folks. There are many, many others. The problem with what we're going to talk about, and we'll dig into this more, is that the people don't get sick from the bad effects of working at a post-fire scene typically until many, many years later. And when that does happen, it's often not tied to being an occupational type of cancer. So here's the problem. When you roll up to a fire scene and you see this picture here, you got the flames, you got the smoke, you got the heat. Your brain tells you that that environment is hazardous to you and that you have to protect yourself appropriately from those elements. Right? We all get that, or you just stay away. That works too. However, when we see this, 3 days later, with the roof burned off and walls missing, we think that it's like a walk in the park and that there's no hazards. Right? There's clear sky, there's comfy temperature, everything. There's nothing to tell our brain that there are hazards. This is what I call blue sky syndrome. And because of that, the result of that, and why it's what I call it, is because nothing telling our body what's going on that's hazardous. And so people are not wearing the PPE that they should be wearing, and bad things can happen down the road. There are health issues there, you just can't see them. And that's very problematic, which is why this education is so important. And so as a result of that and what we're doing tonight, I'm hoping that you will do better now that once we're done, that you know better. All right, so what are the health issues? There are plenty of them, as you will see here in a moment, and it's important for us all to understand what they are and recognize what they are and how they can have adverse effects on your body, so that you can protect yourself and not become a statistic later on. But these are very unhealthy scenes. There are a lot of aerosols in fire smoke. There are aerosols in the fire debris. We've got invisible vapors and gases. We've got visible particulates, nanoparticulates, meaning really small. We're going to dig into that here in a moment. And all of these things are health hazards, right? And they become toxicants when they contact you. And how is that done? Primarily through inhalation and dermal absorption. And if you get enough in there, then they can be harmful for you. So I'm not going to bore you with a chemistry class, but it's important for you to understand that there are a lot of really bad things in the fire smoke and the residue from that, which sticks around for a very long time. PAHs, they're the most prevalent compound. They can be solids or gases, depending on their molecular weight. There will not be a test on this later. Naphthalene, one of the most volatile PAHs, is produced when things burn. I guarantee you it is at every fire scene. Unless if you got a waste basket with no extension, probably not. But if it's gone to room and contents or anything more, you got gases that are there. Benzene comes from burning wood and burning plastic, the smoke of that. Formaldehyde, we'll hit that a little bit more here in a minute. PFAS, that's a big subject. Carbon monoxide, hydrogen cyanide, all of these things are produced during combustion, during pyrolysis. And pyrolysis, there we go. One of the interesting challenges, though, that we have, folks, is that we don't know, because there's no science around it, we don't know what happens when these things may combine into other products during the fire process. And all of this stuff is sitting around after the fire scene for different periods of time. The gases can bind to the soot, the little baby nanoparticulates, right? Specifically, because of the large quantity of plastics that we have in today's environment and commercial and residential structures, these produce acid gases. They can condense onto the soot. There's other things too. I mean, it is a conglomeration of hazardous material stuff that is at the fire scene, and this stuff does persist. So to that point, that gases, most of them dissipate within about 2 hours. Now, if you follow NFPA, and while Ed was talking, I was looking at some of the attendees, and I'm really tickled to see folks from other countries around the world. That's awesome. That's awesome. NFPA 1550, which just came out last fall, now requires SCBA for a minimum of 2 hours after overhaul. So when the big red trucks leave, or whatever color you have in your community, if you're working that scene, you need to be wearing one good PPE, but SCBA. The bad news is, though, as far as gases go, and we'll get to particulates here in a second, the bad news is that formaldehyde, several studies show that that can persist as long as 3 days. And these gas molecules can get trapped down in the fire debris. So if you've had a good burning fire and you've got 2 foot of debris on the floor that you got to dig out, chances are high that there are gas molecules trapped down in that fire debris. But if you're participating in blue sky syndrome, right, and you're there a couple days later and there's no hazard, right? Yeah, there is. All right, so let's talk about particulates for a minute. So Dr. John Cimbala, who's at the Penn State School of Engineering, did a study a while back. So the average person can distinguish objects down to about 70 microns. I'm going to tell you about microns here in a second, but that's about the diameter of a single strand of hair. If it's light scattering, and you all have seen that, you're in a room, there's sunshine coming through the window, and you can see the dust particles floating around in the air. That's light scattering. Then down to about 10 microns. Okay, those are important numbers, so keep that in mind. So what's a micron? It's really little. This graphic is around a lot. So you've got your human hair, about 70 microns. The blue circles where it says PM10, so the particulate matter 10 or 10 microns. And then you've got the 2.5s in the red. So you can see how small you cannot see those. But what we're talking about is actually smaller than that, because combustion produces mostly particles that are 1 micron and less in size. You cannot see them. They are there. You cannot see them. Remember, we talked a few minutes ago about the blue sky syndrome, right? Because there's no hazards because I cannot see them. But your body just cannot detect these minute particles. A 2010 UL study showed that over 97% particles at overhaul were small in this nanoparticulate category. Then we did a post-fire study in 2022 out 5 days, measuring inside a structure, which fully supported that earlier finding and brought out some other good information, including the whole formaldehyde can be up to about 3 days. So the particulates persist until either the scene is cleaned up, cleared away, and demolished. But there's nothing there to tell your body that they're there. So here's a related particulate issue. Now, those circles are just for example, okay, for comparison. But this is a fascinating study that was done a while ago in Australia, and they had particulates in still air, so suspended about 5 feet, 1.5 meters, just shy of 5 feet in the air, and they measured how long it took them to settle to the ground. Well, it shouldn't be difficult to understand that the larger the particulate, the faster it fell. Conversely, the smaller, the longer it took, right? So based on what we were just talking about, the ones we're concerned about are these two here on the right? The 1 micron and the 0.5 micron. And why is that important to you? So you have a structure fire, but the roof's still on, the doors and the windows are fine, and the structure gets closed up after everybody leaves, and you're an insurance adjuster or a private investigator, and you show up 2 days later. The moment somebody opens the door to go inside, the air currents will stir up those nanoparticulates that you cannot see, and they will remain suspended in the air for longer than you're probably going to be there working. And that's an important fact for you to know, and just helps to emphasize my point that these things are bad for you and they can be in there for a long time and you just can't see them. Okay, so here's another little interesting tidbit. So the International Agency for Research on Cancer. So prior to this meeting that they had in June, a couple years ago, not quite 3 years ago, they looked at the occupation of a firefighter. Now, what's interesting is prior to this, firefighters were lumped in with house painters. Not quite sure why. In the, I believe it's 50 years or so that IARC's been around, they have looked at many hundreds of products, materials that may be cancer causing, but they've only looked at about a dozen occupations, including this study that they did here at this meeting in June of 22. So they determined that occupational exposure as a firefighter was carcinogenic to humans. And they have a bunch of different categories. This is the worst. I won't bore you with all the other details, but that it was known carcinogenic occupational exposure to firefighters based on sufficient evidence for mesothelioma and bladder cancer in humans. All right, so bladder cancer, you get what that is. Mesothelioma is a cancer that affects the thin membrane protecting all the nice organs that are important to your life in your chest cavity, the lungs, the heart, all that good stuff. Okay. So what's that got to do with us going to the post-fire scene? So my good friend Kenny Fent, who runs the National Firefighter Registry, those folks have determined that for career firefighters, 1 to 5% of their on-duty time, they are exposed to working fire environment. Okay. You'll see where this is going for us here in just a minute. There are a lot of different work schedules for career firefighters, but if we look at one of the most popular, the 24 on 48 off, if you're working that schedule, just as an example, without taking any time off, you work 2,880 hours. So you can see the math on Kenny's 1% and 5%. Okay, so that same math is up at the top. We had a fairly small study, about 50 participants, samples, on a University of Miami study a few years ago, showed that the average time spent in the fire environment, of course, the post-fire environment, but it's pretty much the same thing, 2.5 hours. So if we just accept that for a minute, you see the math there. 12 fires in a year will take you to 30. 58 fires take you 145. So you see where the 1% and the 5% is. Think about the number of fire scenes that you are at in any given year. Now, I know public investigators who work in rural areas. They may only do 5 or 6 a year, okay? But I also know some private investigators that do over 200 a year. The problem is for fire investigators and others who go into the post-fire environment, we're at more fires than the average firefighter. We're in the scene a whole lot longer than them, and often we're less well protected. And that's unfortunate. And we're less well protected because there's nothing to tell our bodies that there are health hazards there. So I want you to think about how long you're in the hot and warm zones at the fire and post-fire scene. If you don't know the definition of those, we'll get to that in just a moment. Think about what PPE you're wearing. I'm hoping that by the end of this evening, one, you'll know what you should be wearing, and you will be able to also then recognize any shortcomings, so maybe you do a little bit better. And then how many scenes are you going to, right? Are you in the category where you're above those numbers? You need to be protecting yourself. So let's talk about the post-fire environment here, the definition of it. So you need 2 categories here. We need time-based and we need distance-based in order to fully understand the post-fire scene, all right? So here are the time-based protection categories. So hot A, hot B, warm and cold. So you see that 2-hour mark between hot B and warm. And then there's a 72-hour mark, and those numbers should seem familiar to you because we've talked about the 2-hour line in the sand, and we've talked about the 72-hour with regards specifically to formaldehyde. So you need to understand those, but you also need to understand this. So the hot zone is whatever has burned the collapse zone, if there is one, and the debris field, if there is one. Let's skip the warm zone for a second, and obviously the cold zone is well outside of where the hazards are. This is where your vehicle should be parked. This is where if there's a command post or a rehab station or anything like that set up, needs to be out in the cold. And you see in this particular example, the wind is moving from right to left. So the warm zone is comprised of what I call the soot print area. So we know that fire smoke is partially burned carbonaceous material, right? It goes up in the air and it falls down. Well, we've already touched on the components of that soot are bad, but when it falls down to the ground and you're there the next day and it's not rained, it's not snowed, there's nothing to help wash that away. That stuff's all sitting in the ground. And when you show up and you're walking around the scene, hopefully you're doing a 360 from a safety perspective. But whenever you're walking around, you're stirring all that stuff that you cannot see up in the air. Think about what PPE you're wearing. I'm guessing it may well be not a lot. And that's a problem, right? And then to make things a little worse, as we mentioned, there can be gas molecules attached to these nanoparticulates. So it's bad stuff, and you don't know it's there. So everyone who passes through or works in the warm zone or the hot zone needs to be wearing adequate and appropriate PPE at virtually every post-fire scene. Are there exceptions? There are. But I will tell you that they are few and far between. And based on what we've just been talking about here a little bit, you hopefully understand that. And again, folks, we are just scratching the surface here. We could spend 2 or 3 days talking about all of this stuff. So the gentleman on the left is adequately attired and appropriately attired in PPE for working at the post-fire environment, as is this folks here, right? So what is the minimum? You need to be covering as much of your body as possible to minimize dermal absorption. The hotter you get, the more you sweat. If your skin is exposed, all those little nanoparticulates can more easily get absorbed into your skin. They can under any circumstances, but there was a study or information out a few years ago that's been disproven that said something like for every 5-degree increase in surface temperature, dermal absorption goes up by X 100% or whatever, like 400% or some silly thing like. And that statement was rather prevalent, but it has been disproven. But the fact remains that the ability of your skin to absorb these bad things does increase as you get hotter and sweatier. So covering up as much of your skin as possible is good. You need to have a helmet. It needs to have a chin strap, and that chin strap needs to be connected. So when you fall down without the chin strap, that helmet may well be hitting the floor before you do, and that's not good. Adequate and appropriate footwear, right? Something with a steel or composite toe and puncture-resistant sole. There's pros and cons to leather and rubber. We're not going to get into all that. Anything's better than nothing. Adequate respiratory protection. We'll come back to that. And then protecting your hands. Throwaway gloves, like you can see in the picture, that are I don't know, $1.50 a piece are good. You need to have nitrile gloves underneath. But you need to understand that nothing that you wear, short of a level A hazmat suit, will protect you from gases. All of this is protecting you from particulates, with the exception of the respiratory, which is protecting you from gases. But all the rest of your body is not protected. Even if you're wearing structural firefighting gear, that stuff is not made to protect you from gases. This is why we talk about the 2-hour limit. And if you're going into a scene in less than 2 hours, that's fine, but you need to, one, be adequately protected, and two, get in and do what you got to do and get out just as possible. Otherwise, wear a CBA. So once we've been in the scene, we need to, when we're done, we need to clean ourselves off. So the tools get rinsed off, right? And then you doff what you are wearing in a certain specific order. The respirator, believe it or not, is the last thing that should be coming off. I know the natural tendency is to jerk that thing off the minute we walk out of the structure. Please don't do that. But if you do this correctly, you can reduce about 85% of the contaminants that you've got around you. So then you need to clean off, wipe down all your exposed skin areas. And think about all the other things that are contaminated. It's not just you and what you're wearing, right? All the tools that you took in there, your camera, your radio strap, all of that stuff. Everything gets packaged up. It doesn't just go back in your vehicle. It all gets packaged up in two categories. It either is going to get thrown away, disposable, like the Tyvek suit. And I'm not saying you have to wear Tyvek. Tyvek's good, but anything, long sleeve shirt and coveralls is going to keep that stuff off of your skin. But whatever you do, it's either going to get thrown away or it's going to get cleaned. And we could do a whole 2-hour thing just on this whole subject of field decontamination, but we're just scratching the surface here. But the important thing is it gets packaged up, plastic bag. If you've got turnout gear, here's a hint: put it in a clear plastic bag. I have heard horror stories of full sets of turnout gear getting thrown in the trash because somebody grabbed the wrong black plastic bag. And that's not good. That is expensive. Make sure you don't put anything that's been in that fire scene in the passenger compartment. And then as soon as you can, you need to take a shower and clean the rest of your body. The fire service uses the adage shower within an hour. Sometimes that's not possible, but it needs to be done as soon as possible. So what happens if you don't do these things? Well, failure to do field decon or not doing it correctly can lead to secondary exposure to other people. So you can see here in this little graphic that I put together, you work the scene in the top picture. You are contaminated when you walk out of that scene. Where are you doing your doffing and your field decon? At that imaginary line between the hot and the warm zone. Okay. But if you don't do that and you get into your vehicle, now your vehicle's contaminated. If you go to an office or a fire station or wherever after that, then you are contaminating all that stuff to others. If we had the time, I'd show you a real interesting video that explains all this that the friends at the University of Miami did. But your bottom line is you're contaminating others. So remember, this is stuff you can't see. You just have to trust me that it's there, because it is. Then you get back in your personal vehicle. Well, now that's contaminated. And then you get home to see the family, and you're providing secondary exposure issues to them. And as the big red arrow shows, if you just go straight from the scene home, you're just taking all of that stuff directly home and probably more of it. It's not good. So let's bring all of this health related stuff together, right? So you understand, hopefully, at some level, that post-fire scenes have health hazards. So these can affect you in various ways and various times. Um, but there are a lot of variables within that. You can have a high concentration of something bad for a short duration, or a lower concentration for a longer duration, and they're equally as bad for you. As I mentioned, inhalation and absorption are the two most common routes of entry of this bad stuff into your body. But you can have ingestion. So you take a break, you're going to grab a snack and a bottle of water, and you don't take off any of your PPE, and you don't wipe off, your face and your neck and your hands. Is that stuff traveling in with your food and beverage? Maybe. Are you not wearing the right footwear, and or you fall and hit a rusty nail, whatever, all sorts of scenarios that we can come up with, right? Splintered debris and injecting stuff into you. You never know. But the big thing that we have here, the big variable, is this thing called individual susceptibility. And here's the example I like to use. So you and I start on the job the same day. We go to the same fires. We're in the environment for the same period of time, wearing whatever PPE, probably better now, probably less years ago because we didn't know what we know today. And we do, let's say, 25 years, and we retire, and I get cancer and die 2 years later, and you don't. Individual susceptibility. Your DNA is different than mine. Yours is different than pretty much everybody else out there, right? I mean, the odds are infinitesimally small. Your heritage that you bring with you through your DNA, all of that is stuff that we cannot predict and we cannot measure. So you want to roll the dice? Okay. Or you can protect yourself and hopefully live a longer life. So then we got this little thing called latency. As I mentioned, the folks that are dying from occupational cancer from working in the post-fire environment, it's typically happening many, many years later. Leukemias, blood cancers can show up in as little as 3 years, can be longer. On the other side of the spectrum, lung cancers can take up to 30 years to manifest and present a problem. So not only are we fighting and trying to deal with hazards, health hazards that you can't see, but in most instances, you go home from all of these fire scenes, post-fire scenes, feeling great. Back in the day, we had the black snotty nose and whatnot. Yeah, hopefully we're not doing that today, but that doesn't mean that stuff's getting into you. But you go home and you're fine. And then, 10, 20, 30 years later, something bad happens. So it's hard to tell the brain and your body to protect yourself today from something that may or may not happen in the future. But, that's still what we need to be doing. So lesson number one for our chat. Post-fire scenes are very unhealthy. I don't care if it's a room and contents or it's a pile of debris on the ground. They are very unhealthy environments for us to be working in. And if you're working in them and not adequately protecting yourself, this may lead to significant health issues sometime in the future. And the only way you can protect yourself from the possibility of that happening, and there's no guarantees here, there's no promises, but when we know better, we do better, and hopefully it works, is to wear adequate and appropriate PPE. And that really needs to be at almost every scene. one of the early slides that I showed here showed a vehicle fire. Uh, Vehicles are just as bad, boats are just as bad, aircraft are just as bad. All of these things have the same health hazards that we've been talking about here, focused on structure fires, but they are all equally as bad. So y'all remember this picture from the beginning, right? This is just a little side entertainment here thing for a second. Did you see the face in the flames? I did not for a long time until I used this picture at a training event and put it up on a great big screen, and somebody in the back of the room like, hey, wait a minute. All right, so enough about health issues. Let's talk about the safety issues around the post-fire scene. Now, what I want you to understand is this is not scene safety. Take a look at this picture. You have got at least 5 people that I can see with weapons there. And who's in the red circle? All right, the firefighter's getting ready to go in. I won't bore you with all the details of the story. And this is not a training scenario. This actually happened. Fortunately, about 15 years ago, and I'm hoping these folks know better, but that is not scene safety. But in order to go home safe, we need to practice safety, and we need to have a safety management system. And I don't care if you're there by yourself or you're part of a team of 25 or 30 people. Failure to identify and recognize safety hazards at post-fire scenes is bad. And it can lead to injuries and fatalities. Now, the good news is there have not been but a handful of fire investigator at scene fatalities over the years. But there's no good record keeping. If you're on the public side, you get lumped in with the firefighters. And if you're on the private side, it may not be captured at all. But just like every fire scene is different, every post-fire scene is different. And I'm not going to tell you that you have to do X, Y, or Z every time. However, practicing safety is a good thing. And this all ties in with the health because it's all related, right? But there's no magic silver bullet. That we have to do our job and work safely. So a good safety management system looks like this. And the first category, administrative controls, those are around well ahead of doing any work, right? Our policies and procedures, SOPs, SOGs, whatever you want to call them, and then training to those and other training and pre-incident planning, all that stuff is done well before there's ever any post-fire scene to go to. But then once you receive an assignment by however means you do to attend a post-fire scene, there's some good safety information that can be gathered before you ever get there, right? Interviewing neighbors, interviewing the first in fire crews can tell you stuff. Fire department pre-plans, building plans. If you work in an area that are where the builders are required to submit plans for approval, that's good. And then doing a site safety assessment before you start any work. And we do that first on the exterior with a 360 and then on the interior. Now, here's the challenge with that exterior 360. Our natural, if you're a fire investigator, and I realize that some folks here are not, and that's cool because this is all good, important information for you. But if you're a fire investigator, when you're doing that 360, what are you looking for? You're looking for indicators around the fire. Do it first from a safety perspective, then do it from an origin and cause perspective. Identify the hazards, then determine the level of risk that hazard presents to you and to anyone else working in the area at the scene, right? And then once you've determined the risk of each hazard, then some may need to get mitigated, some may not. I mean, if you've got an unstable wall, but it's on the opposite side of the structure from where you're going to be working, what's the risk to you? It's pretty low. If you're working right under it, it's quite high, right? So every hazard, and you can do this mentally, right? Now, if it's a complex investigation and a complex scene, documenting all of this is very good. There's a number of ways to do that, but for most fire scenes, you can just do this in your head. I would be noting it in my report. And then you make sure you use the right PPE, and hopefully this all leads to everybody going home safe, which is good. I touched just briefly there on larger complex fires. Uh, the best practice is for you to have a dedicated safety person managing the safety aspects of your scene. They're the ones that are going and doing the risk assessment, identifying what needs to be mitigated. They need, as you can see here, to be familiar with this stuff that we're talking about here tonight to a much greater degree. For those of you, if you're on the fire investigation side, on the private side, there's some interesting discussions that I've been a part of where I've had people say, I can't tell others what PPE they should wear at a fire because they don't work for me. It's your scene, and I'm going to tell you about some legal issues here in a little bit, why that type of an answer is bad for you. You need to be controlling your scene, establish PPE requirements, and make sure that they're followed. And then that person also needs to have stop work authority if there's an immediate hazard. All right, so I know that there's some of you from other countries. I'm going to guess that you have similar occupational safety and health laws, standards, requirements in your country, similar to those in the US, either at a local level or up at a national, whatever. So I'm speaking focused here for a few minutes briefly on US occupational standards, if you will. But you need to be familiar with what you have in that applies to you. And my guess is that if you have, they're going to be pretty darn similar to what we're going to be talking about. So just a few minutes here, because there's a general lack of awareness on how these things apply to folks working in the post-fire environment. And I will tell you, it's a little bit like putting a square peg into a round hole, because this is not a traditional job and it is not a traditional work environment, but we have to comply with it nonetheless to the best of our ability. So here in the US, the OSHA regulations apply to every private employer, most federal employers, there's some exceptions, and some local or state employers, government, local or state government. There's 4 parts. The ones that apply to us are in the general industry part. You can see with the others there. Some of these are old. And as time goes on, it's harder and harder to change these and modify them. But you should regard them all as a minimum standard that you should be following. If you work for yourself, you're a sole proprietor, they don't apply to you legally here in the US. Still a good idea to follow them. If you and somebody else are partners, neither one is an employee of the other, that becomes a bit of a gray area. But if you are working for someone else, these apply to you in most instances. There's a lot of stuff, but they've got a little catch-all, and it's this general duty clause where the employer is required to maintain a workplace that's free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious injury or physical harm to employees. So when there's no standard, that's what they're going to fall back on if something happens. Uh, if you are a fire investigator or closely aligned with fire investigations, I do have a free paper that's available to you. All you have to do is ask for it, that talks about in great depth, because we are just scratching the surface here, the OSHA requirements here in the US that apply to the job. All you got to do is ask for it. So if you are a government employee here, again, here in the US, there are OSHA state plans. So you can see here 23 states or territories. They cover private and state and local government. And then we've got 6 additional entities that have approved plans for local government. So private folks, the regular OSHA standards apply. For the local government, they apply. If you're a state employee, they may not. The bottom line is, folks, you need to know what the laws and regulations are where you are working. Wherever that is in our beautiful world, I guarantee you that you probably have laws similar to this that you need to be understanding of. What's interesting is, especially with these state plans, the states can have more restrictive or added stuff. It just can't be less than what is promulgated at the OSHA regs. So just going to cover 3 things very briefly. And again, this is another subject, a little boring, but we could spend hours doing this. So PPE. And in this slide and the next one or two, the letters, or excuse me, the words in red. Yes, the words are comprised of letters. You are correct. The words in red are just my emphasis because there can be a lot of words. Right. So protective equipment shall be provided, used, and maintained whenever it's necessary by reason of hazards or environment, chemical hazards, blah, 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 that may cause, right, capable of causing injury or impairment through, oh, look, here's those 2 words again, absorption and inhalation or physical contact. Okay. So the citation there at the bottom, that just means it's Title 29 of the U.S. Code. CFR means Code of Federal Regulations. Then we've got Part 1910, and all of the general industry stuff is 1910, and then the specific sections after that. All right, so have we pretty well talked about the fact that post-fire scenes are a hazard environment and that there are chemical hazards vis-a-vis the gases and the particulates? Yes. Are they capable of causing injury? Yes. Can it mess up or get into your body through absorption or inhalation? Yes. That means that you need to be provided with and use adequate and appropriate PPE. Specifically regarding respiratory requirements, 2 things I want to mention to you. One, if respirators are necessary, they are. Okay, we've already talked about that. They are. Your employer must have a written respiratory protection program document with worksite specific procedures. You're required to have that. I guarantee you there are a lot of fire investigation companies and probably others that are going into this environment that do not have that. I have a template available. It's also yours free for the asking. We're going to talk about respirators here in just a sec, but it's important to understand that you can't have facial hair that impedes the seal of whatever respirator you're wearing. Now, there are hood respirators, and that's fine. You can have whatever facial hair you want if you're wearing a hood type thing. But if you're wearing SCBA or an air purifying respirator, which are the most common things, you may not have facial hair. That impedes the seal. You can have a nice bushy mustache, whatever. It just can't impede the seal. Okay. So what does minimum respiratory protection look like? These are the two that I have. So on the left is a half face piece air purifying respirator. On the right is a full face piece. And the cartridges are color coded, right? So you can see here's the cartridge. So this technically it's called a filter cartridge assembly. So the outer layer is a P100 filter. P does not mean particulate, but 100 means that it is protecting you from 100% of the particulates down to zero point 0.3 microns. And it has, in the US, it has to be magenta in color. Different countries have similar regulations, but may have different colors. But here in the US, magenta tells you that it's a P100. So is that blocking everything? Nope. The only way you're going to block everything is SCBA. But this is the next best thing. That is attached to a cartridge. And again, color coded, they call an olive color. And it protects against a bunch of gases, but specifically for us, and this is anybody working in the post-fire environment, regardless of what your job title is, this covers acid gases, oily vapors, and formaldehyde. If it's just yellow band, it does the acid gases and the oily vapors and a bunch of other things, but does not do the formaldehyde. So if you know you're going to be at a cold scene that, has been out for 2 weeks, and all you've got is just regular yellow without formaldehyde, right? Based on what we now know, that's fine. But I will tell you, they cost the same. So you might as well get the one that protects. How long are they good? Depends on the manufacturer. Read the instructions, follow whoever product you're using. Generally speaking, it's 40 hours of use or whenever airflow is the slight bit restricted, or worst case, you're starting to smell outside things. You need to wear respiratory protection. If you're wearing a half face piece, like there's on the left, you should be wearing goggles. They do make them for going over glasses, but you should be wearing goggles because otherwise you are subjecting yourself to what's called ocular, in other words, through your eyeballs, absorption. So just another form of the dermal absorption. And remember, you're absorbing stuff that you can't see, right? So the other one I want to tell you about, and this is fascinating to me, is what they call accident prevention tags. So again, red words are mine. So it's a notification, it's a sign. I'll show you an example here. That your scene may have potentially hazardous conditions that could cause illness. We've talked about that, right? And it's hazards that are out of the ordinary, unexpected, or not readily apparent. Well, everything we've talked about in the hazard stuff, for the most part, is not readily apparent, right? These are for temporary situations. Has to contain a signal word. There are only 4 of those. Warning makes the most sense for what we're talking about, but it could be one of those others. And you have to inform other workers what the warning means and what precautions they need to be taken. Now, if you're there by yourself and you're the only one that's going to be there, do you need to do this? Probably not. But if others are going to be at the scene with you or after you, not a bad idea. So here's an example of one, right? And it's language compliant with what I just read to you. If you're not where the OSHA requirements are in force, you can change the word required to recommended. but it's just another little CYA thing that is easy to do. I had these printed up on a heavy cardstock, put them in plastic sheet protectors, and stapled them to the door frame going into the structure. Or tape them if it's brick, whatever. But it's just an easy few minute step to do to help others, first of all, and be compliant. All right, so disclaimer time, because we're going to talk about some legal stuff and safety liability. I am not an attorney. I am not providing you with legal opinions or advice, but this information did come from an attorney who specializes in workplace safety and US OSHA regulations. And my purpose for having these few slides and talking about this with you is to make you aware of potential legal issues around not having a safe work environment. So if you have a worker that works for you and they're injured on the job, that's pretty straightforward. Here in the US, workers' compensation laws apply. Probably is very similar in other countries. But what about other workers? So here in the US, the OSHA General Duty Clause, which I showed you a little bit ago, has been interpreted by several courts at the federal level to extend to non-employees as well. And that's important for you because if it's your scene, and there's a scenario coming here where we're going to talk about this. If it's your scene, it's your problem. If somebody else gets hurt, or it can be your problem. Think back to my comment just a little while ago where I've had people tell me, on a multi-party examination or a joint scene exam, whatever you want to call it, where folks are there from other companies. Well, I can't tell them what to do. Okay, well, here's the liability issue for you should something bad happen. So in addition to being in court and having legal issues, OSHA can also take non-compliant enforcement action. So what's this mean for you? It means, well, for your employer, or if you are the employer, right, that your safety program protections can extend to non-employees, even if none of your workers get hurt. So that's a bit of a problem. So here in the US, with the exception of the state of Louisiana, all of our laws are based on British common law. Yours may be also, and again, this is why it's important for you to understand the legal implications of doing your job where you are located. But generally speaking, under the common law of civil wrongdoing, four things have to be proven. So I like to picture this as a three-legged stool. So if any one leg breaks and then the stool falls over and the argument fails, but if all three stay up, they hold the weight of the argument, if you will, and which is the cause of the breach. So first of all, the defendant, which is we'll say it's you're the worker and your employer and you get hurt. We won't overly complicate this, but the defendant, in this case the employer, owed a duty of care to the plaintiff. That's the injured party, so that's you in this instance. They breached that duty by whatever reason. They didn't have policies, procedures, training, whatever. That you, as the plaintiff, suffered an injury or an illness, and that breach of duty was the proximate cause of your injuries. So if your lawyer can prove all that, you're golden. So here's a scenario for you to think about. Somebody has a fire, pretty decent sized fire, they file an insurance claim. The insurance company hires a private fire investigation company to do an origin and cause investigation. That investigation reveals that there's subrogation potential. Because, the insurance companies, rule number one, folks, and if you work for one, you know this, right? Rule number one is they don't want to pay. So if we can get somebody else to pay, then we don't have to pay. So subrogation is all about getting somebody else to pay. So the initial origin and cause has determined that there's a potential for subrogation. So they notify the insurance company. The insurance company either retains legal counsel or uses their in-house counsel. And, the scene gets frozen essentially because the initial origin and cause investigator can only do so much once that aspect has been determined. And we have a big exam. Some folks call them joint exams, some call them multi-party exams. But that's where representatives of the various other involved entities show up, and we all look at things together. You could have 3 or 4 people. I've been to them where there's 50 people or more. So it's typically led by whoever the lead investigator from the origin cause folks. But there can be many, many other people present. So in this particular scenario, there are hazards. They've not been sufficiently mitigated or addressed at all. There was no safety briefing. There was no PPE requirements for people there, and somebody gets hurt. Okay? So think about that scenario in your world, and who are the defendants? Who are going to be, when that lawsuit is filed, is your name going to be on it? Who else's name is going to be on it? How many other people? And they throw a wide net. A lot easier just to be doing things right, isn't it? So you're the injured party. Your attorney, you're the plaintiff. So your attorney, in this scenario, right? Does your employer have a written respiratory protection program? Does it have required worksite specific procedures? What are the overall safety programs and policies? What's the training that goes along with that? What are the actual practices? Having stuff on paper is one thing, but were those followed? And who else are they going to interview and say, hey, does your company do this? Does your company do that? What were folks told? Was there a safety briefing? Probably not. Should be. Probably not. If there was it documented? Was the appropriate PPE used? Were the appropriate safety procedures done? All the stuff that we've talked about. They're going to look at all of the activities and practices, both at this incident and past practices. This is just the highlights. There will be more. But heaven forbid if somebody gets hurt, this is what you're going to go through, and it's going to last for a long time, most likely. How many of you do training burns or demo burns or have been to them? So this picture, and I will tell you that the guy who puts this on is an acquaintance of mine, and they don't do this anymore, but they made the mistake of putting this picture up on about a year and a half, 2 years ago on their Facebook page, and I saw it and snagged it, and they know I'm using it, but they don't do this anymore. But take a look at this picture. So this is a demo burn. I will tell you, it was at a fatal fire class, so there's bodies that are being burned along with other stuff. But with the exception of 3 of the 4 presumed fire folks, the guy on the yellow left, or excuse me, on the left with the white helmet, I do not think is wearing any respiratory protection. The other 3 firefighters are. Other than that, everybody else is street clothes. Look at that smoke plume. Where's it going? Right over their heads. What happens when that smoke cools? Where does that soot go? It's falling down on them, right? This is bad. Do you think that's a liability issue? Absolutely. There are specific NFPA standards, 1402 and 1403 specifically talk about these type of demo and training burns and what we should be doing. And if you are hosting those or attending those or developing them, you need to be following the appropriate standards. And why is that? Well, because the fuels that are used have a lot of bad stuff. PFAS, big thing these days, right? And there are thousands of different PFAS substances. Some are much more harmful than others. But what's the main uses of them? Water repellency and flame retardants. So all of your furniture is going to have them. OSB, there are some states that have outlawed the use of OSB in training fires. Not many, but a couple states have. I know Maryland is one. I think Massachusetts is another, not positive. But the glues in plywood and OSB, all of that stuff's bad for you. All of that stuff's bad. And when you're burning that, as we've talked about, lots of health hazards. So, lesson number 2. These post-fire scenes can be extremely unsafe places to work. We've scratched the surface on that. I would love to be able to talk to you for hours about it because there's a lot more to do, but we've scratched the surface sufficiently, right? Training, planning, scene management, all of these are important for a successful outcome. And keeping records and documentation is vital on the off chance that something may happen down the road. Because you can't make it up. And if it's not in writing, it didn't happen, right? Or in a photo. Photos are good. So just briefly, the picture on the left, right? Appropriately attired person working in the post-fire environment. And while you read the cartoon, which I like, I want to tell you briefly about the picture on the right. About 5 years ago, training demo burn, like what I just showed you, but a little different, put on by a not to be named large U.S. federal investigation agency. And the feet in this picture, the guy was standing in front of me and he had just walked through the scene. So they have a burn cell, they burn it. This was actually a 2-room cell because we were looking at flow path. And the firefighters go in, put the fire out, and then all the class people got to walk through and look at the effects of the fire flow. So what's on this guy's shoes, right? It's all the soot that from walking through that scene. And I guarantee you there were well over 100 people at this training class, and very large percentage of them walked through and their shoes looked just like this. And then everybody walks back in the hotel to go to lunch. Where's all that stuff going? It's going onto the carpet. As it dries, it then goes up in the atmosphere, right? Because the air current's moving around. That's bad stuff. They don't do that anymore either, but still, you see what the problem is. There's always room for improvement. We can always do better. So we're winding down here. Questions for you to ask yourself, right? Are you and your employees who are going to post-fire scenes for any reason, investigator or remediation or insurance adjustment, I don't care what. Are you following health and safety best practices and the applicable safety and health regulations for where you are working? What about people that you are hiring or retaining to take there? Same question. So how do you protect yourself? How do you protect your workers? Written safety policy, we talked about that. Written respiratory protection program. Identifying safety procedures well beforehand and training to them. Doing site safety assessments at every scene, documenting it. Safety briefings if be more than just a couple people there, requiring adequate and appropriate PPE, and just following recognized safety practices. Continuing on that thought for just a minute. Regular documented training that covers everything. There's a whole list of, for those of you in the US, there's a whole list of required training for OSHA. You need to know what it is and make sure that you're doing it, right? OSHA will be the first ones to tell you that untrained employees are a hazard and that that's a problem. You need to have inspection records for all equipment. If you have employees that are using their own power tools, ladders, etc., those need to be inspected and by the employer and assured that they are safe and usable. But practicing continuous safety improvement is good. So here are 5 documents that are available to you. The one on the left is free at that link. The NFPA docs, you can read them for free on their website. They're not cheap to buy, but anybody working in the post-fire environment should be familiar with and relying on these. If you're not a fire investigator, the 4 on the right, the NFP ones, the 1550 will give you a lot of good information, but these are good resources to have. Regarding specifically your training records, right? For every class that you give, the syllabus, who attended, what the test, the copy of the test and their scores, student feedback, not just the good comments, the good, the bad, the ugly, whatever. If you have 30 students and 30 of them turned in an evaluation form, you better have all those. And the bio for every instructor along with their creds. Very important that you have this and keep it for a long time. Better to have it and not need it than, as we talked about, have something bad happen and you get caught with your pants down because you don't have it. All right, my buddy Frank Lieb. Some of you know Frank, some might not. You see his who he is here. We have to train for safety and we have to practice it. And this needs to be supported at all levels of the organization. They are interrelated, safety and training. And this is a great comment from my buddy Frank. You may be familiar with the whole concept of a SWOT analysis, right? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I want to show you a way that has been translated for fire investigations, and I would suggest for others working in the post-fire environment. And this is done by my friend Ted Kohler, who's a fire investigator in Arizona, and also a cancer patient. And he sent me these words a while back. I really liked them, and he has approved the use of them. So knowledge is a strength, right? But it's a weakness when ignored or not used. You have the opportunity to be a change leader by ensuring health and safety principles are followed, because if not, the threat of occupational health issues, and I stuck in the liability because that's a problem, continues. I think those are really, really good words. It takes a lot to change culture, but the longest journey starts at the first step. You need to have buy-in at the top, and it needs to go all the way down, and it needs to be continuous for a long time. But change can happen. If you're listening to this and you're thinking of things that you or your organization could be doing better at, take a stab at it. Right? Is everybody appropriately trained? Is there documentation for that? Reevaluate your processes, internal and external. If you're on the private side as an investigator and you're leading a joint scene exam, send a letter out to everybody in advance. Yeah, I got a sample of one of those too. That's yours for the asking, but it's your scene. Think about the what ifs. That 1 in a million chance that something bad could happen. If you're not prepared for it, that's a problem. So set the standard, set the requirement. Here's what you must be wearing as PPE on the site. Have a safety briefing. as part of that, make sure that everybody's got the PPE and know how to use it and it fits and all that good stuff. And make sure that everybody's doing the right thing through policies, procedures, and training. It's just important to do. So final thought here. We're winding down. We're almost done. And then we'll see how many hours we go with Q&A. So all of these practices in the fire service, probably anywhere in the world, were commonplace at one time. When I started off as a volunteer firefighter many years ago, we rode the back step, the tailboard. We would dress out going down the road. How unsafe was that? Right? Doing first aid without gloves, CPR, all of these things. We did all these. Well, why did they go away, right? We don't do them anymore because we learned that they're bad for us and they're unsafe for a variety of reasons. And this has been proven by research and by science. Well, in the post-fire environment, we have the same issue. We have people who are following unsafe practices, doing things because they don't know better, probably, I hope. But those unsafe practices that you see here need to go away for the same reason, and they need to be replaced with people looking and doing like this. All right, so here's my contact information. We'll do Q&A for here in a moment. But if you want that, I'll give you an opportunity to snag it. And that concludes our little chat. Went a little longer than I thought. You just never know, but a lot of material to cover in a very short time. And I appreciate over 140 of you hanging in there and doing this. So I will turn it back over to the Provident folks, and we'll go from there with some Q&A and comments and whatever else y'all have. I will stick around as long as you want.
All right, Jeff, first of all, thanks for the presentation. I'm gonna just quickly go down through the comment section. An old friend of Provident, Phil Washington, posted, when I investigate a fire, I'm wearing a 5-gas meter and have a Team Top M 2000C particulate meter. I'm just read that comment. Let's see, there's another one down here. Thanks for the information, new tools in the toolbox. So just to all our listeners, just so you know, when it'll be Thursday before you get any email, because Sam and I got some other stuff going on tomorrow. So Thursday, you can expect the email. Within the email, we'll have a PDF file of Jeff's slides. We'll also have his contact information within that email. So if you want to contact Jeff directly for some of the things you're asking for, somebody said, I'll take all the SOPs you have. So we'll let you reach out to Jeff personally to get some of the stuff. And we'll also try to put some links into the email for some of the things that he mentioned. So let's go to the Q&A. Where'd you go? There we go. So here's a good one. This one come in right at the very beginning, Jeff. How shall we approach this problem of senior firefighters and officers who don't wear PPP after the fire is out? As a firefighter with only 2 years under my belt, how would I suggest safety first? Jeff, I'll let you take the first crack at James's question.
Absolutely. And that's a great question. And I hear that or variations of that all the time. And the part that I hear a lot is, in addition to what he has pointed out, these senior people, change starts at the top. If your chief or whoever is in charge of your organization, whatever word it is, if they're not bought into this, you're going to have a problem. That doesn't mean you can't do. And when they say to you, just like John said to me all those years ago, why are you wearing all that stuff? And your answer can very simply be, I know better, I'm going to do better, because I'm going to protect myself and my family. But the other side to that is you'll have these folks that they've done fire investigations for 25 years and I never wore that stuff and it's too late for me. Okay, maybe you're right, but you're in a leadership position. Can you set a good example for the new folks by doing the right thing, even if it is too late for you? And I think the answer to that is simply is yes.
So James, what I'll say to you is you do what you have to protect yourself so you can live a long, healthy life. And if you're in a career department, so you can rate the pension system when you're done. I'll share something with you. I did a cancer risk reduction class a few years ago, and I had an old salty captain in the class say, "Hey, Sonny, let me tell you something. I've been doing this for 30 years. And if I'm going to get cancer, I already have it and I'm not going to change anything." I said, Cap, you might be right. But what I want you to think about something, on after September 11th, there were a lot of people that worked a rubble pile in New York City. And there were a large number of people that got some bizarre and rare forms of cancer. But there's an equal number of people that worked that rubble pile that have not developed any cancers yet. And I also know, and I'm sure, and I asked the captain, I said, "Are you aware of anybody who never smoked a cigarette but has lung cancer, or somebody that used to smoke 2 packs a day and never had lung cancer? You want to roll the dice? Maybe you don't have cancer yet, but why not take the steps you can to protect yourself now so you can rate the pension system when you retire in a couple of years?" Sometimes, James, you got to make it personal, but my advice to you is you do what you have to protect you. If you can't change them, you can't change them. That's the unfortunate thing. Craig Hansen mentioned, does the smoke from a brush fire act the same? Jeff?
Yeah, I just saw that. And the answer to that is yes, absolutely. You don't have the gases, you've got the particulates. And there's an EPA study. Again, I can send it to you if you want to see it, but I tell you about it real quick. There's an EPA study that looked at 5 different types of natural materials um, around, different areas of the country, and all of those put off particulates that have health hazards associated. And because of the size of a lot of those fires, those particulates can travel a long ways. There's a lot of work that's being done. You're not seeing it yet, but trust me when I tell you, there's a lot of research work that's being done around respiratory protection for wildland firefighting. So we're going to see recommendations. Research takes time, I know, and some people want stuff yesterday, but they're hang on because there is stuff coming. But short answer, absolutely, Craig. Thank you for that question. Yes.
So Joe Dumphy commented, in addition to gases, chlorine products like cleaning materials under the kitchen sink combines chemically with lots of substances. How does chlorine, gross contamination, aggravate the effect of the gases?
Yes, absolutely. So think about all of the different things that you have in your home today, cleaning products, uh, gases, laundry product. I mean, there's so many different things, pesticides, fertilizers, all of these things in your house. If you have a structure fire at your house, and I'm not talking room and contents, I'm talking, burning the roof and the walls off. All of that stuff is mixing together, and we don't have any clue. There's been no research whatsoever, according to NIOSH, about what happens when all of these ethyl methyl bad things combine and turn into other bad things. Um, lithium batteries in, tools and toys and things like that. Those are a problem. I mean, it is bad, and all of those hazards are present for some indeterminate period of time in the post-fire environment.
So, based on all the research that's been done by UL, FSRI, and Arizona State University and Miami and stuff. You know, I'm going to go back to the statement you made earlier, Jeff, and that was know better, do better. We all know better now. We all know better now. The scientific and the research community has done so much on behalf of the fire service in our country. The information's out there, and it's all backed up by science. And I'm just going to, I wrote down your comment, know better, do better, because I like it. And I think that's what everybody needs to know. You know better now, do better, protect yourselves. So let's move on. When Joe made it, please send the white paper you mentioned. Joe, I wrote down the link. I'll have Sam put it in the email that goes out on Thursday, so you can hit the link itself. And again, if there's things that you want or that Jeff mentions available, his email contact information will be in the email that goes out, so you can send an email directly to Jeff. If for whatever reason you can't find his email address, if you drop me an email and tell me what you're after, I'll get word to Jeff and we'll get it to you. John Hawkworth asked the question, are we allowed to use these slides in our safety classes?
Well,
Let me help you out.
So here's the challenge, and we were talking about this before we started. It's a double-edged sword because the slides have some of the information, they don't have all of the information, and unless you are competent and qualified to provide the rest of the information, it can be challenging. And as you will notice in each slide, it's also copyrighted stuff. If you have a particular need, let me know, reach out, we'll talk about
it. Hank, is the fire service doing enough to recognize the hazards of wildland urban interface fires? I'll let you go first, Jeff.
Well, the short answer is no, but as we mentioned, there's research forthcoming that's being worked on in several different locations around the country with really smart research people. University of Arizona is doing stuff with fire agencies in California and in Arizona and elsewhere. University of Miami is doing stuff in the state of Florida with their wildland folks. There's stuff coming. It takes time, unfortunately, from the time when you have an idea for research and you present that idea and it can be the greatest idea since sliced bread, to a research entity, typically a university, and they like your idea, and from that to an end product, meaning a research paper that has results and methods for improvement, can be 5 to 7 years,
So
if not longer.
You mentioned Arizona. I know the folks down there at least 2 or 3 years ago had started going out with wildland teams. They're actually collecting urine as a base level and then collecting urine, and the firefighters are on the line so they can measure the different chemicals that are being discovered in urine. Same with blood. They put the rubber wristbands on people now where they can collect what's in the atmosphere for the rubber wristbands, and they're able to take the data out of it. So to your point, Jeff, the research is being done. You know, I kind of look at it this way: smoke is smoke, and I don't do wildland. I never did a lot of wildland. If I couldn't hit it with a deck gun, I didn't mess with it. But at the end of the day, protect yourself. Phil Washington commented, be the example and wear the proper PPE. Caleb Simmers, my department has a cancer prevention policy while on the scene of structure fire. This includes wipes, garden hoses for gross decon prior to departure. We also during overhaul monitor the air until the gases come down below OSHA standards. You mentioned the PA 1550 requiring SCBA for up to 2 hours after fire trucks depart. Has this standard changed that SCBA be required for the entire length of overhaul?
2 hour requirement, and I'm looking to see where my book is. I can pull up the section for you. The 2 hour is after overhaul. It is definitely required. It's in a different section during overhaul. And that was first proven by the Phoenix studies in the 1990s that the Phoenix Fire Department did with their fire investigators and their industrial hygienist, Dawn Bolstad Johnson, who did some very good early work on the overhaul and the post-fire environment. But definitely full PPE and SCBA during overhaul, and 2 hours after is the new minimum.
So,
If you're following that.
You mentioned this earlier, and I'll just throw this out. That question, I get that question at times when I do the cancer risk reduction, is, well, we have gas meters and we run them, and if nothing shows up, well, okay, you're probably using a 3 or 4 gas meter. So you're not detecting formaldehyde, you're not detecting benzene, you're not detecting the things that you can't see that can be absorbed through your skin. And so, look, folks, I did enough firefighting and overhaul in my day that, yeah, it's a pain in the backside to have an air pack on your back with all that turnout gear on. The fire's out. You already took an ass whooping from the fire, and now you got to do the overhaul. And it's 90 degrees outside, and if the humidity level's at 80%, I understand all that. Well, you know what? Call a mutual aid departments in to do it. Give yourself a break. Don't beat everybody up to the point. That at the end of the day, you can find a way to be able to accomplish what has to be done wearing the full PPE. Maybe you take the turnout clothing off and you go down to a throwaway Tyvek suit at some point. So there's ways to address that. It's just a matter of, again, I go back to what Jeff said earlier: know better, do better.
Let me just add one thing to that, Ed. And this is not going to be a popular statement, but that's the way it goes. In the post-fire environment, the purpose of a gas meter, the sole purpose of a gas meter, is to determine whether or not IDLH exists. That's it. There are over 100 known gases in the post-fire environment. And as I've said more than once this evening, how those combine during combustion pyrolysis is unknown. Do not rely on meters to determine whether or not it's safe to take off respiratory protection because, oh gosh, those meters do not measure nanoparticulates.
Okay, there you have it, folks. So we're going to move on here. We're to the closing. Jeff, I certainly appreciate you taking the time to share your message tonight. A lot of good comments in the comment section. I want to remind our audience there'll be a brief survey we'd like you to complete. Keep an eye open in your email. It'll come from me with your certificate. Again, it'll probably be Thursday. Again, tonight's episode will be uploaded to providentins.com. You'll receive that link in the email within the next day or two. Please make sure you check your spam or junk email before sending me an email saying, hey, I didn't get my certificate. For those of you who use the webinar as a training for a group of people, when you receive the thank you for joining us email from Sam, there'll be an Excel spreadsheet attached. Please, I'm begging you, please, use the Excel spreadsheet to send the names and email addresses to me for the certificate. It makes life a whole lot easier for me to get your certificates taken care of. You can view previous webinars at www.providentins.com and use the training resources link in the upper right-hand corner. Please join us on April the 28th at 7 p.m. for a webinar with the on-call company that manages our travel assistance program for our clients that have a 24-hour accidental death and dismemberment policy. For those of you that aren't Provident clients, join us to learn a little more about one of our products. Also on May the 27th, Chief Will Anderson from Ohio will be doing a live webinar on fire chief burnout, causes, consequences, and potential cures. I just recorded a webinar with him yesterday, and it was very interesting to say the least. Until we meet again, stay safe for your family's sake, and thanks for being here tonight.